Hello, young math Padawans. It's Mrs. Angel with your lesson for today on solving multi-step equations using both distributive property and combined like terms. Here's the key. If you remember your order of simplifying, you always have to simplify any groups before you can combine from left to right. So I'm always going to apply my distributive property first, since that deals with a group. Then I'm going to look to combine like terms. So over here in example 1, I have 3 times the group of x minus 2 plus 5. Now the first thing I notice here is that this plus 5 is not inside of the group, meaning this 3 will not affect 5 at all. Starting with distributive property, I'm going to do 3 times x and 3 times a minus 2. That gives me 3x minus 6. Now I can bring down my plus 5. My like terms in this expression are my constants, negative 6 and positive 5. If I combine those together, negative 6 and positive 5 combine to negative 1, bring down my 3x, and this expression is fully simplified because I have combined all like terms. Taking a look here at example 2, again applying distributive property first, but be careful, now we are distributing a negative. Negative 2 times 3x is negative 6x. Negative 2 times a positive 1 is going to change that to a minus 2 or negative 2 and bring down my positive 2x. In this expression, my like terms are variables, not constants. I have negative 6x and I have positive 2x. So when I go to combine those, they combine for negative 4x, and I bring down my minus 2, and since everything has been simplified and combined, I know that my expression is correct. Now over here in example 3, there's a very common mistake that happens. A lot of students see this 10 plus 2 and they want to add them together. No, we know better than that. This 2 is part of a term, 2 times the group of 6 minus 3x. We have to simplify that term before we can add 10. So apply distributive property first, then combine your 10. Go ahead and do example 3 on your own now. So after distributing 2 times 6 is 12, and 2 times a minus 3x is a minus 6x, I was able to combine from left to right. My constants were 10 and 12, which combined to 22, and I bring down my minus 6x. You could also write this in standard form as negative 6x plus 22, which comes in handy later on in algebra. And that brings us to our equations. Now, the more complex an equation gets, the more methods that you have to try, the more things that you can do. Let's take a look at method 1. I'm going to start as always by putting a line down the middle of my equal sign. Now, normally in equations like this, we have the choice of either distributing or dividing. Here's why we have to distribute first. Because we have another term on the same side of that group, if I were to divide first, the division property of equality states I have to divide everything on both sides by the same value, meaning every term. So it would look something like this. I would have to divide this group in product by 3. I'd have to divide 26 by 3, and I'd have to divide 5 by 3. So it's possible, but then my equation is x minus 2 plus 5 thirds equals 26 thirds. And I'm going to guess that most of you do not like working with fractions. So in this case, if you have a group and a term outside of the group, I always recommend using distributive property first. So starting with distributive property, 3 times x and 3 times a minus 2. And now I have my new equation. From here, I do have options. In this method, we're going to use our combine like terms tool next to combine our two constants, negative 6 and positive 5. And that's combine like terms. Notice both of these tools, distributive property and combine like terms, are not properties of equality. They're not things that you do to both sides of the equation, only to one. These are tools that we use to simplify expressions, not affect equations on both sides. meaning 26 has not been affected this entire time, and it won't be affected until I use a property of equality. Speaking of which, now that I have my groups are gone and I'm down to 2 terms, I can just go in and solve this like a two-step equation using APO and DPO. So go ahead and finish solving this equation on your own. So after applying APO and DPO, I ended up with x equals 9. Now normally we would check this solution, but instead of checking, we're going to solve this same equation using a different method and a different series of steps. Over here in method 2, we're still going to start with our distributive property, but then instead of combining, we're going to use our properties of equality. As always, I put a line down the middle of the equal sign, and I'm going to use my distributive property tool first to eliminate that group. Now from here, if you didn't want to use the combine like terms tool, you have other options. I see 2 constant terms, a -6 and a +5, meaning I could either use APO and add 6 to both sides here to eliminate one of those terms, or I could use SPO and subtract 5 from both sides to eliminate those terms. I never like dealing with negatives, so I'm going to choose to use APO next and add 6 to both sides, therefore getting rid of all of the negatives on the left side and only dealing with positives here on out. Now my new equation is 3x plus 5 equals 32. From here, you can apply SPO and DPO to solve for x. So why don't you go ahead and do that right now. Now remember, you could have also decided to subtract 5 first, in which case your equation would have been 3x minus 6 equals 21, and then you can use APO and DPO. Like I said, the more complex the equation, the more methods you have to choose from. In our second equation here, I'm going to start with the line down the middle of my equal sign. I see again a group with a coefficient and a variable term. Why can't I start with division? Well, I could, but remember, if you start with division, you have to divide every single term by the same value. So everything on both sides. Now this one would actually work out because everything is divisible by -2. So if you want to try that on your own, maybe on a separate piece of paper, go ahead and try it and see if you end up with the same solution. For the sake of making sure that we don't make any mistakes with DPO, we're going to start off with applying our distributive property. And remember, distributing a negative changes everything. Now that our parentheses are gone, we can look for some like terms. This case, our variable terms are our like terms. I'm going to go ahead and combine those. Now that we're down to one variable term and one constant, this is a basic two-step equation and can be solved with APO and DPO. So go ahead and finish solving this equation now. So I ended up with -2 equals x. Instead of checking, we're going to solve this same equation, a different method, meaning a different series of steps. As always, I'll start with my line down the middle of the equal sign, and I'm going to start with applying distributive property to eliminate my group. Now from here, instead of combining like terms, if you recall from our previous video, we have a constant in the middle here, a -2. Anytime you have a constant on a side of an equation, you can always use a property of equality to make a zero term. In this case, since it's a -2, I'm going to apply APO and add 2 to both sides. Now, since we're left with 2 terms, but they're both variable terms, we cannot avoid using our combine like terms tool. The nice part is, at least now the 2 terms are right next to each other, so the math might be a little easier. From here, we are dividing and done. And we still end up with -2 as our solution. So all in all, from these examples, we've learned that when you have both a group with a coefficient and another term on the same side of the equation, it's better to distribute first, eliminate that group, and then you can have your choice of combining or properties of equality. If you choose to divide, just remember, depot only works if you divide all terms. Now it's your turn. Your job on this page is to solve the same equation twice, but using a different method. So if you would like to start with distributive property first, then combine like terms on this one, you would have to do distributive property first, followed by properties of equality on this one. You could also try depot and dividing all terms, or you could start off with getting rid of the constant 10 using properties of equality. I'm going to leave that up to you. Now, even though I'm not solving these equations with you, I'll let you know that you should end up with a solution of -4. So as long as you end up with -4, you did your work correctly. That's it for today's lesson. I will see you next time.